everybody has been. I mean, you go from somebody that lost their job, that their kid's sick, family members being stressed out, and if a loved one dies, even if it is because of COVID or any other amount of reasons, because we still have people doing stupid stuff, during COVID. So we still have a lot of trauma coming in. There's still a lot of sick people. And families handle grief a whole lot different. So it's not just the patients with the violence, it's the family members with the violence, and then you restrict visitation, and it's just a recipe for disaster.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Hey everybody, Kevin McFarland here from the Art of Emergency Nursing, and as always, thanks for listening to the podcast and thanks for downloading this episode. I have to remind you, it's almost the end of the year, so if you haven't done so yet, do me a favor and leave a rating and review for this podcast. That is how other people find this podcast, and it makes it look better for all the platforms. So if you would do that, I would really appreciate it. A 5-star rating from you really goes a really long way. So if you would, I'd appreciate it. Now, a couple months ago, I told you I was going to be doing something called the Nurses Podcon. And what it was a nursing conference with a bunch of podcasting nurses from all over the country. Oh my God, I can't tell you how fun it was. We're actually in the process of planning the next one, and we're actually looking for suggestions on what city to go to. The cities that are in the running right now are Las Vegas, Nevada, Nashville, Tennessee, and Austin, Texas. So get on there only if you're going to vote for Vegas. Just kidding. Anywhere you want to vote for, please do so and let us know where you want this conference, where you would like to spend your hard-earned money to come see this conference. Now, when I had the opportunity to participate in Nurses Podcon, I knew that I needed to interview somebody, and I figured the best bet would be make it somebody local. Well, lucky for me, I knew an amazing nurse based not too far out of Nashville, Tennessee. The guest on the podcast today was kind enough to step up, come with me, join me in front of a live studio audience, and open up and talk about emergency nursing and everything that comes with it. I really appreciate the fact that he did that, and boy, what an amazing episode it turned out to be. My guest today is a master's prepared certified emergency nurse. He's a licensed paramedic, and he's got an interesting job history that I'm going to let him tell you about. You tell me if you think this would make him a good fit for nursing. You are going to love today's episode with my friend, President of the Tennessee Emergency Nurses Association, Todd Haines. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin McFarland, and I have a podcast called The Art of Emergency Nursing. And if you haven't heard my podcast, what my podcast is really about emergency nursing stories. And the podcast was born in a conference much like this one. I was at an emergency nursing conference with a bunch of emergency nurses from all over the world. And we were sitting at a bar, and we were telling stories, as often nurses do. And we were, you know how the stories go with nurses. You tell one story, and then I got to tell one that tries to up that one. I got to try to tell one that ups that one. And sure enough, we were sitting there telling stories, and I remember thinking to myself, now that would be a podcast I would listen to. So then I was like, a little while later, I decided to go ahead and create that podcast. So that's what the podcast is all about. It's emergency nursing stories. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, please do. It is a lot of fun, sometimes funny, sometimes kind of sad, sometimes really sad, sometimes really funny. But it's always a lot of fun. So that's the podcast. My name is Kevin McFarland. I have been an emergency nurse for about 15 years and have been in the emergency department for about 25. So emergency nursing is my love. It's what I love to do and love to talk about. I have a guest with me here today. I'm super excited to have Todd with me today. I'm going to let Todd introduce himself. He is one thing I will tell you is he is the president of the Tennessee Emergency Nurses Association, and I'm so honored to have him here with me today.
Hey, well, thank you, Kevin. It's an honor to be here. My name is Todd Haines. I'm the president of the Tennessee Emergency Nurses Association. I've been in emergency nursing for a little over 11 years. Been in the ER, well, a little over 11 years, because that was my first experience with them.
Oh, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, got bit by that bug. This is my third career. I'm currently a director of trauma services for a community level 3 trauma center. And any chance I get to go to the ER, there.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things we'll definitely talk about that you mentioned that you started in the emergency department. I want to spend some time talking about that. But you mentioned how long you've been a nurse. So how was it starting in the emergency department right from the get-go? What did you do before nursing?
Well, this is my third career. First one was in law enforcement. Then I went to work at a glass manufacturing plant here in town to make stupid money, not having to fight, get shot at, chase people, and make windshields. So
Big change.
It was a very big culture shock in my head. Got offered an education buyout and decided, yep, let's do this nursing thing.
Good for you. That's awesome. Now, I think law enforcement probably prepared you in a special way for becoming an emergency nurse. Are there some transferable skills there between the two?
A few. Don't run near as much, which is a good thing.
That's good.
The coffee is always there. The stories are always there. You're constantly having to talk to people and negotiate with people. But it's a different side because you're there to help on the emergency nursing side, where on the law enforcement side, you're there to fix a problem.
Yeah.
So, and it may be physical, may not be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what do you love about being an emergency nurse?
Darn near everything. Because the emergency department, you don't ever know what's coming in. So the adrenaline of the radio tones going off or coming in, or here in this area, of course, I'm sure it's big everywhere, but people driving up with patients that have been shot or overdosed, you just don't know what's around the corner. But it's also so challenging because you have to use your skills at everything. Everything that you learned in nursing school, in life, in your education as being a nurse or an ER nurse, you may have to use all of those skills: respiratory, cardiac, GI, GU, trauma, shock, everything, neuro, all on the same patient or in the same patient assignment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you have a unique background that many of our audience may not have. Not many folks go from law enforcement to nursing. So law enforcement teaches you to kind of talk to people and problem solve and be crisis management. What do you think for the average new grad? For the average new grad, do you think that the ER is a good place to start?
I was a new grad that started in the ER. I think it's the best place for a new grad to start if they are bitten by the ER bug. There are some students, because I'm also a clinical adjunct for a local university here, in the ER, and there's a lot of students that start out the day, I'm going to be an ER nurse, I'm going to be an ER nurse, and by the end of the day, they're like,
maybe not.
Maybe ICU. So, because it's very different, but my philosophy is that if you bring a new grad ER nurse up and train them the way that your ER culture is, then you're going to have a great person. You're going to have a great team member, and that's what ER nursing is about.
There's a lot of advantage to being able to train your own and grow your own folks, to teach them the way you do it, and you learn that particular system. But boy, what a great way to kind of grow your own.
It is, and plus you don't have to break the bad habits they've grown
somewhere else. Yeah, for sure. Well, we're going to talk more about that here in just a minute. So what's your favorite part of emergency nursing, and why did you choose the ER?
Because of the fast pace is why I chose it. Well, I think it chose me because I did my senior semester clinical with a preceptor in the ER close to my house. And, after the first 2 hours, I was like, oh, hell yeah. These the clinicals I've been in is nothing like this. So this is it.
It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny. One of the things I found, and I worked in the emergency department before I went to nursing school. And what I found was when I was doing my med surge clinicals or my, OB rotation or whatever, I remember thinking to myself, okay, a lot of cool things to learn. But what I really found was that I really wanted to be an ER nurse, and I was pretty set in that mindset. Now looking back, I wish I would have maybe spent a little bit of time on maybe med surge or some SAC. But boy, starting in the ER, one, it can be done, and don't let anyone tell you it can't be done, because it absolutely can. And there's a lot of advantage to starting there's a lot of advantage to starting in the specialty that you really want to do. And I think there's a lot of advantage to nursing's hard, right? Like nursing's hard, and if you're doing something that you don't necessarily like, that makes it even harder. So I couldn't imagine doing something I didn't like just to put the time in, which was a lot of the advice that I was given when I first became a nurse. They were like, well, go do some time in med surge, go do some time in subacute, and then work your way back to the emergency department. And I didn't really feel like that was great advice for me, because I wasn't sure I was going to like it.
And I was the same way. And we have people that come to, especially now with a lot of people leaving to go travel and things like that. You have ICU nurses, and you have floor nurse or med surge nurses and ortho nurses coming down to the ER, and they make great nurses. So if you want to get to the ER, but you don't get in there right straight out of school, learn all you can when you're at the bedside, wherever you are, and then bring that knowledge down with you, because in the ER, we hold CCU patients, we hold med surge patients, and plus you need that foundation. We can show you how to do the ER stuff. The way that hospitals are now, there's several hospitals, most of the hospitals held patients in the ER, because as ER nurses, we've kind of created that ourselves. That's fine. I don't care if you don't have enough staff, just put them over there. We'll keep them and watch them. We'll keep watering the garden.
One of the things I always tell nurses is the easy thing to remember is as a floor fills, the floor says no. The floor says, nope, we're full, we're good. We have as many people as we can handle. The ER is the one place that doesn't get to say no. More patients come in, we just, we shut. It's like someone showing up extra for Thanksgiving dinner. You just make some room and make room for them, and they get a seat at the table as well. And
Yep.
Same thing in the emergency department. Someone shows up, we're going to take good care of you.
Yeah, and I couldn't imagine, telling because I worked at a facility the one time that the admitted floors could take a timeout. They could take a 45-minute timeout if we gave them too many patients all at once. And I'm like, wow, could you just imagine if we told EMS or locked the front door and put a timeout, we'll be back in 45 minutes?
Yeah, we'll be back just a little bit, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks. We're just going
How
to take
well
a
that
little
would
breather.
go over. It'd
Yeah.
be like a fart in a funeral. I mean, they're going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, that wouldn't really work out. That wouldn't really work out. Well, one of the things that I love about emergency nursing is, as an emergency nurse, you're never at a loss for having great stories. Every emergency nurse, again, the podcast was born out of emergency nurses telling emergency nursing stories. So you show up to a party, someone says, hey, what do you do, Todd? And you're like, well, I'm a nurse. And then the first question is, oh, okay, well, what kind of nursing do you do? And then if you say emergency nurse, which it's kind of funny, I've always identified as an emergency nurse, even when I was not in the emergency department and I was doing other things. People would ask me what kind of nurse you are, and I'd still just say emergency nurse. And if I say emergency nurse, then it'd be like, oh, well, tell me the craziest thing you've seen, or tell me the wildest thing you've seen. And they don't really want to know what's really the craziest, wildest thing you've ever seen. But what's your go-to story? Every ER nurse I know has a go-to story that you're like, you want an ER story? I'll give you an ER story that kind of sums up the ER. And sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're funny, just like in the podcast. What's your go-to ER story?
Well, my go-to ER story is, I used to work at a level 1 academic level 1 trauma center here in town. And we got a flight with a penetrating injury, a flight coming in, penetrating injury across the torso. And it was an impalement, and the item was still there.
Oh, Lord.
Fire cut it off, and okay, all right, well, that sounds like a cool report. So vital signs were rock solid stable, a little hypertensive, and I'm like, well, she's not
They
bleeding.
do have something in their chest. So
Yeah,
it's probably
everybody was getting all anxious, and we worked it as a level 1. Now this right here goes to also lend to why I'm a little bit heavier than your average bear. At 5'13", I'm packing on a few pounds extra.
not a small ER nurse. No.
No. So what happened was this lady was walking out of her house carrying tiki torches and fell down the steps. One went from back here through up here.
Holy, wow! Tiki torch to the chest, huh?
Well, through the back.
Holy cow!
But it went through her bacon. It didn't hit anything. It went all through adipose tissue.
She a big girl?
She was a large girl.
All right. Good for her.
So that's why
Thankfully.
that kind of justifies my extra poundage, because if I ever fall down the
It's
steps
all about
with
safety,
a tiki
folks.
torch,
It's all about safety.
yeah. And then you have your freaky stuff where somebody gets their foot in a grain auger, self-extricates. And for those of you guys that don't know, a grain auger is like just a bunch of little blades that go like that to transport the grain up. He slipped off in it, got his foot. The doctor said, "Can you feel your foot?" And he said, "Yeah, I can move my toes." Well, his toes weren't attached except for by just a little nerve, artery, and tendon. And so big toe and little.
This little piggy went to the market and didn't come
So
home.
these 3 piggies went to the grain auger, and he was wiggling his toes, but they were hanging way down here, wiggling them.
Were they moving?
He was wiggling.
Okay, no. Okay,
I'm like-
an ER nurse. That would overdone.
That's not right. That's
No,
not supposed to happen.
That's not the way it's supposed to go.
Something's wrong.
That's the way it's supposed to go,
Those
yeah.
are no. They're supposed to be.
They're supposed to be attached, and
Mhm.
this little piggy's supposed to be a lot closer to home.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Well, okay. See, this is why I do the podcast, is because emergency nurses have great stories, right? So, holy cow.
I did ask him to stop wiggling his toes.
I would imagine you did.
Don't do
You're
that
like,
no more.
You're like, please stop. I don't want to vomit. So, holy cow. That's a crazy story. And that's what I love about emergency nurses. Emergency nurses, every emergency nurse I've ever met has that kind of crazy story, or that level crazy story where you're like going, wow, that really happened. And we really kind of see it all. If you're not an emergency nurse, you may not fully appreciate the fact that we see people right at the get-go, right at the beginning of their emergency, and sometimes it can get kind of crazy. So that makes it a lot of fun. So, holy cow. Now, in addition to being an ER nurse, you're involved with your state ENA. For those of you who don't know, the ENA is the Emergency Nurses Association. Big fan. It is my professional organization and something I'm pretty passionate about. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with the ENA and tell us a little bit about, as the president, what kind of cool stuff do you get to get involved in?
Oh wow! Well, as far as the national ENA, I've been on several national committees to try and figure all this thing out. The best one was the awards committee. I was the chair of the awards committee, and you're the chair of a committee for an organization that at the time I think had 45,000-ish members. So the awards committee, we had different categories that states could send in for an award, and individuals could send in for a certain award. And just reading all those stories were so amazing.
I bet. Holy
About
cow.
the work that's going on in the emergency department and in the community because of emergency nurses in their communities. That was fun. Right now I'm on the resolutions committee,
Nice.
which goes through the General Assembly that we have that makes the rules and kind of guides the organization more or less. That's been an eye-opener. And the Emergency Nurses Association Foundation, are charitable run, because part of Emergency Nursing Foundation, part of the foundation's role is to award scholarships, educational scholarships, degree scholarships, research scholarships, conference scholarships to emergency nurses that maybe need the little extra help.
What an amazing thing to be able to be involved in.
It is so stinking awesome. And just the people and the compassion that are on the committee and that are within the foundation and within ENA itself is just, the compassion and the passion they have for emergency nursing and community involvement. Phenomenal.
One of the things I've found for those of you, and not everybody in the audience, and both virtually and here in person, not everybody's an ER nurse, and I don't know why, because it really is the coolest.
I don't either.
It really is the coolest. I mean, what the rest of y'all do is cool, but it's not as cool as the emergency department. Okay, that's my opinion. But one of the things that's amazing about the getting involved in your professional organization, whatever that professional organization is, I cannot stress enough how what a great opportunity that is to get involved and really start to kind of push the practice for your specialty. So one of the things that Todd mentioned was General Assembly, and the General Assembly is something that happens once a year for the Emergency Nurses Association, where everyone gets together. We get representatives from every state, and we end up doing it's kind of the business meeting of the organization. So anything that's going to change as far as the organization goes happens in that meeting. So as a nurse, you get a chance to be in that audience and have a vote of what's going to move the organization forward. And it really is it's just the coolest. It feels like a big party, and it always feels like a big family reunion because you see people that you get to see, maybe once or twice a year, and that part's always awesome.
Well, Kevin, it certainly is, but you know that as an emergency nurse, there's something wrong with all of us. Because if that's something that we like doing this job, we love this job, you're not right. Something's wrong.
What I always tell people is, I don't want something bad to happen to you, but if it does, I want to be there. That's all. If something bad's going to happen, I just want to be there to one, see it, two, help out. And emergency nurses have such an amazing ability to just stay calm at whatever. They have like the best poker face. Something comes in, you have a guy come in and got his foot caught in a grain auger, and you're like, wow, that looks really bad, sir. Let's get you triaged. Come on down. And in your heart, you might be going, oh my gosh. In your head, you may be going, oh my gosh, I've never seen this. Oh my God, is that little piggy went to the market? It's not coming back. But the reality is,
I did run that through my head. This little piggy went to. That little piggy had none though.
That little piggy, none for that little piggy. We had one of the first cases I seen as an emergency nurse. We had a kid who was he was home alone. He was about 15, 16 years old. He was home alone, and he found his father's gun. And one of the things that I'm a big advocate for is, if you're going to have a gun in the house, you got to make sure it's locked up, got to make sure it's safe from your kiddos. Because what happens is, kids get curious. And this kid got curious about his gun, and he shot the gun, and he clean shot off his middle toe, just off that middle toe. And sure enough, he came into the emergency department, and he was just a mess. He was, mentally a mess. Physically, he was okay. Like, he'd lost a toe, but he wasn't bleeding too bad. Bleeding is pretty well controlled. And then when we told him, hey, your dad just got here, he's like, oh, just put me down. Just put me down. This is going to be bad. And we spent some time talking to his dad before he went back there and said, he got shot in the toe and all, but he's really worried about seeing you. And just it was one of those amazing things that you're sitting there going, where else do you get a chance to see something like this? And I did tell him this little piggy went to the market joke, and he thought it was funny. His dad didn't think it was funny though. He had seen no humor in that conversation at all, which is unfortunate. But no, I'm a big fan for getting involved. Big fan for getting involved in your professional organization. I'm always an advocate for that. Because it's so cool, and they do such cool things. Now, one of the topics that's very near and dear to my heart is violence. Because one of the things we have to deal with in the emergency department is sometimes fairly violent patients who come in from our community and come through the emergency department. So I know that the Emergency Nursing Association really has put a lot of time and effort into violence in healthcare, as we all are. As nurses, any of us are potentially subject to violence in our workplace. And unfortunately, it's not always taken as seriously as maybe we'd like it to be. I'll never forget the first time I remember hearing a nurse was making a police report to a police officer, and the police officer just kind of looked at the nurse and goes, "Well, this is kind of part of your job, isn't it?" And we were like, no, this shouldn't be part of our job.
Oh, you're a police officer. Getting shot is part of your job, right?
Yeah.
That's what I told one at a community hospital that I worked at. You know, he's like, dude, you got hit and bit. That's kind of part of your job, isn't it? I'm like, you carry a gun. Is getting shot at part of your job? Well, no, I'm here to help them, not get beat up by them.
Yeah. And there's been some movement here in Tennessee around workplace violence and around violence against healthcare workers. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys have been doing at the state level around violence and preventing violence, hopefully preventing nurses from experiencing violence and then dealing with it when they do?
Yeah, sure. Another thing that's good about being involved in ENA as the state council president is that I get to represent all the ER nurses in the state. So
big job.
It's a fun job. It's a big job. It's a fun job because, I mean, I love ER nursing. And, so ER nurses for the most part are kind of laid back because they get it. And as opposed to somebody out on the street that maybe, I don't know, I don't want to pick on an accountant, but somebody that doesn't see what we see daily at work and have to go through daily what we do at work.
It's different being a nurse, right?
Golly,
like, I'm not appropriate for all parties.
I'm not.
Like, I go to parties and sometimes I'm like, they're like, hey, tell us a story. And I'm like, okay, you got to read the audience. Be like, okay, you're not ready for that story, but I'll tell you this story.
Yeah, you have to talk to your audience. You have to know your audience. So the past couple of years has been fought with representing Tennessee emergency nurses through COVID. I've done quite a few media interviews, just talking about what we're going through, the nursing, how COVID's affecting the community, how COVID's affecting, and everything like that. But another part that has compounded it is it's compounded also the workplace violence part of it.
Anytime you have people under increased stress, that increases the possibility for violence. And who hasn't been stressed with COVID in the last 2 years?
Everybody has been. I mean, you go from somebody that lost their job, that their kid's sick, family members being stressed out, and if a loved one dies, even if it is because of COVID or any other amount of reasons, because we still have people doing stupid stuff.
That hasn't stopped.
During COVID, so we still have a lot of trauma coming in. There's still a lot of sick people. And families handle grief a whole lot different. So it's not just the patients with the violence, it's the family members with the violence, and then you restrict visitation, and it's just a recipe for disaster. But over the past several years in Tennessee, healthcare itself has been getting pretty violent, mainly in the ER, because I think all the studies show that, 1 out of 5 nurses have been a victim of assault as nurses as a total, but 3 out of 5 emergency department nurses have been victims of assault just for emergency nursing. So, and then you take the pre-hospital folks into it, the first responders and people like that. It's a big problem.
Yeah. Now, in the chat for our virtual folks, in the chat, just let us know, have you experienced violence in your role as a nurse? And if you're a student nurse, for the student nurses that are in the audience, has anyone talked to you about violence? Has anyone told you that might be a possibility? Because one of the things that as a nursing student, I didn't fully appreciate the fact that you never think that people would be violent against somebody who's trying to help them. And it's not that they intend to always, but some people have pretty poor coping mechanisms. So in the chat, let's see if you've either, 1, experienced violence, or 2, were trained about it or talked about it for those of you who are in nursing school. Now, in our audience, I'm just going to do a quick show of hands. If you've experienced violence as a nurse in your nursing role. All but 2 are raising their hand right now, and that is not uncommon. It's not uncommon for people almost everyone I know in the healthcare profession has experienced violence to some degree, and it's not always intentional violence, but when it is, it's particularly heartbreaking. What are we seeing in the chat? Are we seeing folks that have experienced violence? Lots of folks who have experienced violence. No. Yeah, yeah. Correct. So if you didn't hear that in the for the those of you who are in the virtual audience, one thing she mentioned is that not all violence is intentional. Uh, Patients who have brain injuries, patients who have confusion, maybe they have dementia or whatever the case may be prone to violence with certainly no ill intent. They don't mean to hurt you. They don't want to hurt you. They're just reacting to whatever it is going on. And certainly there is that. And I think a lot of folks that may be the level of violence that they've experienced. What's particularly heartbreaking is when it's not that, when there is intention or maybe not intention. It's usually never personal. They don't know you. They don't know you. They don't really. I know they said bad things about your mom, but they don't know your mom. It's okay. It's no big deal. She's a nice lady. She's a nice lady. She raised you right. You're a nurse, right? But the reality is oftentimes it's one of the things I heard about violence at one time that really has always stuck with me is violence is typically an expression of whatever that need may be, and it's for people who don't know how to maybe express themselves in a great way, may choose violence, and they don't always intend to, but some do, and when it does, that's particularly heartbreaking. But boy, violence is something that every nurse has to deal with. But in the emergency department, when we're dealing with those undifferentiated patients, those patients who are coming in off the streets, sometimes directly from a scene where maybe violence was part of the scene, it's sometimes hard for them to switch those gears and come into the emergency department and be in a care environment where we're not trying to hurt you, we're just trying to help you. So
one of the things I testified to in front of the Senate and the House here in Tennessee is that, the violence that we deal with in the ER, because we're dealing with your acute psychosis, we're dealing with your acute violent acts, victims and perpetrators sometimes. We deal with your alcoholics, your drugs, the whole gamut that you could even think of coming in, and then we just deal sometimes just with mean people that are just mean. You're gonna do what they want you to do, or they're gonna try and whoop your ass until they get it done. We're not talking about Mamaw that's 90 years old with Alzheimer's that threatens to whoop my ass. That's a different story,
yeah,
and that has happened a lot.
Absolutely.
We're talking about something to let people know this is not right, because we also have a problem with repeat customers, some that come around all the time.
Frequent friends.
Frequent friends. We don't call them flyers anymore because that's stereotypes. So frequent friends, and if they know when to come back, they know whose buttons to push, they know what buttons to push. We had an incident, one of our level 2 trauma centers here in town, where a lady was notorious for not doing the right thing, not staying on her medications, adding alcohol to her medications. And she came in one night, and the nurse didn't give her sandwich like she wanted it, because she was still just getting started on the testing to make sure that she wasn't going to die of what her symptoms were. She got threw a notebook at him, threw a thermometer at him, and things like that. And he just drew the unlucky straw as the one that was going to take her as an assignment. And he happened to be the charge nurse. But, just mean stuff like that. And that was why a police officer was standing right there with her. And so she goes downtown, they press charges, she goes downtown, charges get dropped, because guess what? Part of your job. No, it's not.
Yeah, no, we gotta get that mindset that it is part of the nursing role to be the victim of violence. We gotta get that out. That's not a thing. That's not gonna work.
We do, and one of the things we've done here in Tennessee that we're pretty proud of so far, well, we're pretty proud of it, period, is this past legislative session, they did include nurses in with first responders on their increased penalties for assault and aggravated assault. So aggravated assault in Tennessee is a felony, so that means that I still don't understand that word, haven't in years, but you know, every assault's kind of aggravated, isn't it? So it's like negligent homicide. What, did you accidentally kill them? But anyway, so it stiffened the penalties for that, but it still didn't make anything a felony, which the felony in any law, any state, more states have felony healthcare provider protection for assaults than more states have that protection versus the states that do not have that protection. The bill that we had several sponsors for, that we've had in front of legislation for about the past 5 years now, is a felony assault bill. We added healthcare workers on it. In this session, it passed the House of the House of Representatives flying colors. When we testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, they decided to hold off until next session, which is okay. They didn't kill it, so that's good.
Start.
But it all comes down to money, because and I had one of the chairmen, this has been a number of years ago, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee or Criminal Justice Committee said, nobody wants to be that guy that increases taxes or that introduces a bill that's going to have a big financial burden on it. Because right now, if you assault a nurse or a first responder, or a healthcare provider, let's put it that way, or a first responder, it's a misdemeanor. That means the county or city that they're in has to take care of the penalty. And if you make it a felony, then the state has to take care of that penalty. So even if it's a felony and they get 1 day, the state has to pay that 1 day versus the county or the city having to pay that 1 day. And that's why they were reluctant to pass it before. But with the violence that has come out on TV, the violence that has come out on any media source you look at against healthcare workers, COVID has made it that much worse. And I guess because people have been sitting at home, actually paying attention to what goes around, then maybe it's gotten a little bit more teeth to it. But this next year coming up, we're gonna.
Yeah, hopefully that'll pass. One of the things that I'm a big advocate for, and again, this kind of ties back to being part of your professional organization, is one of the important things that we need to do is as nurses have a voice in legislation, have a voice in the political arena, so that we know that we're protected and that we know we're here for the community, but we need the community to be here for us as well. So I'm a huge fan of being part of your professional organizations, because typically they're going to be very politically involved and very politically active. So, well, one, thank you to the Tennessee Emergency Nurses Association and you for working this and getting this worked forward. And boy, I hope that eventually passes to make it a felony.
I think we will next year, and not just me, it's a team effort. The Tennessee Board of Directors for ENA, even the national board has sent some members down for Day on the Hill for us to talk to. I remember when Kristen Klein came down.
Oh, she's amazing.
Oh, God, I love her to death. Yeah. Just phenomenal representation of, why is your state not doing this? Here's your state's numbers. Here's the national numbers. It doesn't compute.
It's important. It's important for nurses. One of the things I always tell nurses, two things I always tell nurses that are always important to do, that I really recommend, is one, always be advocating for your profession. It's an important thing. We need to have a voice in all aspects. So it's important to advocate for your profession. And two, one of the things we do as nurses is we always educate, and we're educating the public, we're educating our peers, each other, but also our political representatives. They need education too. They have no idea what you do during the day. We had a representative come to one of our ENA meetings when I was in New Mexico a long time ago, and every single person, there's multiple emergency departments represented there, and every single one of us said, "You, sir, are invited to come spend the day with us," to the district attorney. The district attorney who, at the time, the state had just made assault of a healthcare worker a felony, but the problem was they weren't prosecuting it, and they were saying, well, it costs so much to prosecute, and sometimes these cases go, and sometimes they don't. And what we invited him to do is every emergency department that was represented there said, "You, sir, are invited to come spend 12 hours in my ER with me," and we always welcome that opportunity to really get a chance to see what exactly goes on in the lives of a nurse. One of the things that's really cool about the ability to podcast and the ability to be a voice to your subset of nursing is to, again, advocate. Advocation is one of the most important things we do as a nurse. So I think it's commendable that you guys are taking that on.
Yeah, and another problem we're seeing is that, we as nurses we have that stuck in our head. That's a part of it. That's a part of it. That's a part of your job. That's a part of your job. So the statistics that are out there are not true statistics because we don't know how many instances that do not report.
Yeah, so many don't report.
So I think a lot of your I think OSHA's coming down with something, mandatory reporting, and I think that we're going to be very much appalled, I think would be a good word, at how much it is actually going on.
Yeah, you never know exactly how big the problem is. Well, I appreciate the hard work that you're doing. I appreciate you. It takes a lot to step up and be the president of your state chapter, so that's super cool. We appreciate you advocating for emergency nurses all over the country and all over your state. So thank you for that.
It's fun. There's not another better group of people to hang out with and be a part of and just try to make better for than nurses, and especially emergency nurses.
Absolutely. Now, the last question that I always ask all my guests, he just went like this. He just hung his head like, oh God, here it comes. The last question I always ask my guests, I always ask guests to give me 3 things to remember, 3 things an emergency nurse should always remember, and 3 things they can just forget. 3 things that just aren't, just forget that. That's not going to happen.
3 things to remember. Always remember you're going to make it. You're going to make it. No matter how hard it seems, no matter how bad it seems, you're going to make it. Always remember you do need help. I was a bad one to ask for help, either at work, away from work, or anything like that. Yeah, it really, we're wired really ridiculous. That just
women are often smarter, and not all women ask for help, but guys, sometimes our pride gets in the way, and we're like,
yeah, no, I don't need help.
I'll be fine.
I don't know what that monitor is beeping in that room for, but no, I don't need help. That's okay. But you do need help. Period. Both physically and mentally on the job. Don't forget how to get home, because sometimes a 12-hour shift in the ER, you're wondering where you park well, at least I did, but that may be because I'm old. But I forget what parking lot I parked my car in, and how to get home. So the 3 things to forget you know everything. And because you don't. Because emergency nursing, I've been in it 11 years, and I learn something new every day.
Absolutely.
Forget your pride, because you're a team. Teams have prides, but individuals don't have pride. So you have to leave your pride at the door and be the best part of the team that you can be. And Forget what everybody else thinks about you. As long as you know you're doing the right thing, you're doing it.
I always tell people, your opinion of me is none of my business. Like it just, yeah, that's sometimes hard to forget though, because we're all wired to worry about what other folks think.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's hard.
I quit worrying about what other people think 2 careers ago. I don't know.
That's great advice. Great advice. Well, Todd, I can't thank you enough for being here with me today and sharing your wisdom with the audience. Audience, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Thanks so much for being here with me, and I really appreciate the hard work you do for your patients, for your community, and for your fellow nurses. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm honored. I'm humbled to be here. Kevin McFarland, you rock.
Thank you. I'll pay you later. I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.